to the discussions at the TUC next week. And obviously, I think certainly we saw the massive amount of demonstrations yesterday demanding 50% by NHS workers where they could take place, and the movement in terms of fighting for jobs, fighting for safety is absolutely vital during this pandemic. So we've got a range of speakers officially from the trade unions that support the Shop Stewards Network view, as well as having an open mic later for a whole range of disputes and activities from local branches and workplaces to report on. So I'd like to welcome Rob Williams, who's the National Chair of the Shop Stewards Network, to open the rally. And then we got some speakers from the unions that have agreed to speak today. Rob.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks everyone for dialing into this NSSN rally. As comrades may be aware, this is the 10th anniversary of our first rally at TUC Congress. And we followed the TUC, or rather preceded it, to Manchester, to London, to Brighton, to Bournemouth, to Liverpool, and of course today we're forced to have this online. Now, however, TUC Congress, in our opinion, has never been more important, perhaps the most critical time facing workers since the Second World War. TUC Congress may have been stripped down this year and truncated because of the corona restrictions, but union activists and reps will be looking for it to give a lead in the face of the crisis that we face. Workers are fighting for our lives and livelihoods. We need workers' control over workplaces to make sure that they're safe, and increasingly, we are fighting to stop the hurricane of redundancies and confront the bosses who use the threat of job losses to try and smash our pay, our terms and conditions, and our pensions. Now there is talk that the Tories are looking to freeze the national living wage, which is already too low and has an unacceptable age restrictions. More than ever, this TUC needs to be a council of war, where the class lines are drawn. And for us, that means the workers cannot pay the price for this crisis. We must send a clear message of defiance to the employers and their Tory government, which will in turn give confidence to workers that the unions will fight. We've already seen in this pandemic, the workers join unions when the need to be organised is clear and a fighting lead is given. And that has pushed the bosses back. For instance, to get the right PPE in the Royal Mail offices, in the NHS, and to check the Tories' attempts to rush kids back to school in June. We must face up to the scale of the crisis and firstly issue a warning to workers of what is at stake and scale of action that will be necessary, and that in turn will send a signal to the Tories and the capitalists that the union movement will fight any attack. And that includes the increasing union victimisation and blacklisting of workers. And our response is attack on one of us is attacking us all. And that's why we'll hear today from Tony Smith, the Unison rep in Hull FCC. We'll hear about the fight of Richie Venton in Usdaw, in Glasgow, in IKEA. We'll hear about Colin Hayden in Unite, in Manchester, a bus worker in Go Ahead. The starting point must not to be glossed over or even cover up the brutal class character of the crisis, which risks disarming and disorientating union members. The bosses in British Airways, like all the other employers and this Tory government, are quite clear. There is no common interest. There is no national unity. There is only brutal class conflict. Never forget that just months earlier, before Christmas, Boris Johnson's newly elected Tory government had included new anti-union legislation in his Queen's speech, specifically targeted at the rail and transport unions. That is still in the pipeline. But this isn't a strong Tory government, but it is weak and divided and seems to be in perpetual crisis. The idea that Boris Johnson's 80-seat majority means that this government is omnipotent and set for a decade in power, as some unfortunate union leaders think, is a reflection of their pessimism, not the reality. The unions are still potentially the most powerful force in society if they're mobilised behind a fighting programme. The mood to fight is increasing as COVID strips bare the class inequalities in society. We've already seen the incredible Black Lives Matter movement fill the streets this summer. And yesterday, despite the new lockdown restrictions, our supporters were on protests all over the country to demand a 15% pay rise for workers in the NHS and care sectors. And we welcome those unions who are now putting in pay claims that reflect that demand. Just weeks ago, thousands of students forced the Tories to U-turn over A-levels results, one of the 13 retreats by this government. If they can do it, what can 6.5 million workers organised in the trade unions achieve? As I've said, the unions still have enormous power if they have a fighting programme and if they give a lead. And that's what this Congress should be all about this week. That is the way to attract the millions of unorganised workers into the unions. We call for the TUC Congress this week to organise a day of demonstrations and protests in every town and city on Saturday, October the 24th, or whatever other day, to demand the furlough scheme that is scheduled to end later in October, that is continued and upgraded actually, because we say if there's no work for workers, they should receive their full pay. Our starting position is no redundancy, no pay cuts to pay for this crisis. If a company wants to close up, they should be taken into public ownership. If British Airways wants to sack 12,000 workers and cut the wages of the other, it should be renationalised. If Debenhams workers are fighting for their jobs and agreed redundancy terms, they are right as an island this week to occupy those workplaces. And we'll continue to support all workers who take action, and we hope to hear from some of those in this rally itself. Now, some may argue that this programme is a pipe dream. But of course, people said that the same in the 1930s, and yet a decade later, the NHS was created. This, like then, is an emergency, and capitalism is the cause of it. Now deepened by COVID, which it failed to deal with, and now economic crisis, which it can't cope with. To their capitalist chaos, as many of the unions are affiliated to the NSSN already do, we proudly counterpose socialist public ownership and planning to the chaos of this market system. The NSSN will continue to play our part in this fight, continue to what we can to help mobilise the labour and trade union movement to fight the Tories and the bosses, to do what we can, as we always do, to support those unions that fight, to support those workers who are in action, and to win the fight of our lives. Enjoy the rally, comrades, and solidarity.
Thanks, Rob. And I think, thanks, Rob. And I think certainly we really appreciate the support that we have from our affiliated unions. We have a few official speakers here today. First speaker I'd like to welcome is the new General Secretary. Was new to us. I think this is the first official national event that Sarah's has been able to speak to, and very much welcome the new General Secretary of the Bakers Union. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Katrin, and thank you to Rob and the National Shop Stewards Network for the opportunity to speak today on the 10th anniversary alongside a great platform of speakers and activists. I'm going to concentrate today on the state of statutory sick pay and the campaign that we've just launched with Don't Leave Organise and some other unions and organisations around improving it. I'm incredibly proud to be the new General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, and I know Ronnie has been a great supporter of the National Shop Stewards Network for years, and I hope going forward the relationship we have as a union with you that we've had for years will continue and strengthen further. Throughout the pandemic, our members in the main have worked hard, keeping the nation supplied with bread, cakes, biscuits, Yorkshire puddings, all the healthy stuff that's kept you fed for the last 6 months. And it was brilliant to finally see them recognised as the key workers they are. We've always known that our members are essential key workers. It's just a shame that it's taken a global pandemic for the Tories to recognise that they actually need working class people to keep feeding the nation. However, being labelled key workers is all well and good. But the reality for many of our members is that their treatment during this pandemic couldn't be any further away from what you may expect for a key worker. We've seen examples of members being forced to isolate due to breakouts of positive COVID cases in their workplaces, yet expected to survive on statutory sick pay at £95.85 a week, which barely covers the rent, never mind anything else. And we've seen full households of our members at Greencore have their wages slashed as each of them have had to isolate due to being in contact with a positive case or through one of them displaying symptoms. And by doing the right thing by staying at home, they've been penalised for doing so financially. Statutory sick pay is a very real issue for our members and has been for a long time, especially for those in unrecognised workplaces, part-time workers on low contracted hours, or for those on 0 hours contracts. For many of our members, their wages are the only income they have. We have many migrant workers who don't have access to the full range of benefits British nationals have. For example, the changes to housing benefit stops them from being able to claim it, despite the myths and lies that suggest otherwise. That's all over the mainstream media. Also, the flaws in the universal credit system mean that even those who can claim it for support receive it far too late to make a difference, leaving many relying on £95.85 a week or nothing if they don't meet the lower earnings thresholds, which actually affects over 2 million workers in the UK. How's that even right in 2020? Never mind when we're living through a global pandemic. This is why it's important to be in a trade union, and if you're not in one and watching this on whatever channel it's streaming, please join one. You can use the TUC tool to find the right union for you, which is on their website, though there are enough of us in the trade union movement and involved in the National Shop Steward Network that can point you in the right direction. The BFAWU, other unions, Don't Leave Organise and other organisations have just this last week launched a campaign to improve statutory sick pay, as £95.85 a week is simply not good enough, and in fact it's shameful. We are calling for the government to legislate for full rights to at least 6 weeks of contractual sick pay for all workers from day one at 100% of wages. The scheme would be funded by those employers not currently paying company sick pay for the first 6 weeks, so there is no extra burden on the taxpayer. After 6 weeks, statutory sick pay will kick in for 28 weeks, but at an increased rate, in line with, for example, statutory maternity pay, and would cover all workers. And those on 0 hours contracts or short contracted hours who currently wouldn't receive anything would receive pay based on an average of the last 12 weeks. As a union, we strive to improve the lives of people working in our industry that is predominantly low paid, and this campaign is designed to do just that. When people are ill with COVID or any illness, the last thing they need on top of that is the additional stress and worry about how they're going to eat or pay the bills, look after their children, or simply just survive. So please get on board, join the campaign, join a trade union, and let's make things better. And just before I finish, if I may, I'd like to send out a few messages of solidarity. First one to Richie Benton, who I know will be mentioned later, disgracefully sacked from IKEA. We stand in solidarity with you. The PCS members down at Tate Gallery, disgraceful actions from their employer, and we stand in solidarity with you as well. Our members at Greencore, they are fighting to get the company who are in profit despite the pandemic to do the right thing, pay 100% sick pay and a decent hourly wage. I'm so proud of each and every one of you, as is the union. Keep going, we are stood with you all of the way. And to everyone else, because there's just too many people fighting at the minute for me to mention everybody in standing solidarity with them all, across the movement, to all of you that are fighting injustices caused by your employers or fighting against the government, keep going. United we are stronger. As Rob said, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Even now, regardless of the pandemic, we are the 99%. Don't ever forget that. Solidarity.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. And I think certainly it's absolutely critical that everybody can self-isolate on full pay and have the means to live and protect the communities as well. Our next speaker is another General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, Dave Ward. Very pleased that you're able to support our rally today.
Thanks, Katrine. Thanks, Rob. And real pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. I want to start out by setting out the issues as I see them, but I do want to concentrate on what are the solutions to the problems we face. I think first of all, we've got to make it absolutely clear that COVID is not just a public health crisis. What we've seen as a result of COVID is that it's exposed just how deep the underlying inequality is in the UK. Secondly, in a world that in recent years has been dominated by Brexit and dominated now by COVID, I don't think we can afford to forget just what the scene was before we went into COVID. I mean, we've seen decades of attacks on decent jobs, on pensions, on pay, on terms and conditions. And we already had, we got an economy that's in a state now, but we already had an economy that was founded in the UK on insecure work, in-work poverty, austerity, and something that frustrates me every day of the week, business leaders that seem to have become the top of the tree, you know, valued by the media, valued as though like they do a great job, when all they do, most of them, is they don't create anything, they break things up and they cut pay, jobs, terms and conditions and never bring any other solutions to the table. So, of course, what we've now got in a post-COVID environment is that we do face, without any shadow of a doubt, the biggest jobs and economic crisis in all of our lifetimes. And this is on top of climate change and the need to fight and save the planet. And it's also on top of something that I often talk about, which seems to have been forgotten, that we are facing, in any case, the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to see technology advance at incredible pace. We're going to see it threaten more jobs, artificial intelligence, digitalisation. This is not being spoken about at the moment. So look, my message is very simple. We've got to stop talking about the problems now. And we have collectively got to start coming up with the answers, the solutions and the actions to fight for change, to fight for a new deal for workers and to shift the balance of forces in UK society. Now, what is it we need to do to do that? Well, I think the first thing we need to finally settle on and agree is that it's the trade union's responsibility to bring about change. You know, our role, our job is not just to whether we support the Labour Party or any other political party. You know, we ain't got time to wait for politicians to bring about change. It's the trade union movement. It's trade union leaders. It's every single union and every single representative from the shop stewards that are on this call fighting together in the belief and confidence that what we've achieved in raising the issues of key workers during COVID, what we've achieved in the world of safety during COVID, these are things that should be giving us confidence now to set out a very distinct agenda, a trade union agenda, where we fight for shared industrial and political demands. And I believe that we can fight for new standards of employment, we can fight for a new welfare state, and we can fight for a new economy. And this is what the CWU will be calling for at the TUC over the next couple of days. We're talking about building a new economy that's founded on the principles of equality, of universalism, and of collectivism. The steps that we need to take along the way, for me, are very clear And I want you to buy into those steps. And I want you to go back to your unions and call this debate on. The first one is that we have to agree within sectors of the economy what the standards of employment should be. And unions in those sectors must come together, agree common bargaining agendas, and fight within those sectors, mobilise within those sectors to root out insecure work. The TUC pledge, the organising pledge, is a step forward, but we've got to do a lot more. We've got to do a lot more to bring about greater cooperation within the trade union movement. And we have a responsibility to organise workers who are not in unions and work together with other unions, work together with other groups who have emerged in recent times, collectives who are fighting for our principles, our values, may not be a trade union, but we can tap into those groups and bring them with us on the fight. But look, here's the number one thing that all of us must now do. And the CW is calling for this in one of our TUC motions. We're saying that if we want to win for working people, the biggest challenge facing every single trade union leader at the moment, every single rep, is how do we mobilise the power, the collective power of workers in this country? We've got to say that we've seen campaigns very effective. The Black Lives Matter movement has been unbelievably effective in cutting through with their message. We've seen it with Extinction Rebellion. But what's the answer for trade unions? What are we going to do? And what we're saying is, you know, I want to start that debate genuinely, and it may well lead to collective action, and it will have to lead to collective action. But it's important that we give unions an opportunity to come forward with what they could do as part of wider collective action. So look, here's my message to you today, to the shop steward movement. I think that the trade unions have asserted agendas during COVID, but we've got to take it one step further now. And I hope that you will go back to all the various different unions that you work in, and that you will agree with me today that the biggest single challenge now is unions coming together, working together, solidarity as one, and making sure that we develop a strategy before the end of this year that mobilises working people in this country. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks Dave very much for that, and I think certainly our solidarity as well to all your members who've busted a gut through the pandemic, but also having their own problems as well. And I think that message to the trade union movement is very important. The next speaker is the president of USDOR, the Retail Workers Union, who's clearly had a very busy time during the pandemic. Amy Murphy, over to you.
Oh, hi everyone. Thanks ever so much for inviting me. I've spoken at the NSN a few times now. It's always a great pleasure hearing from other unions and the fantastic work you're doing and you continue doing for your members. So when I addressed you last year, I spoke about the crisis in retail and the demise of the high street, and I would so love to be able to say that this has improved, but unfortunately not. In fact, it's far, far worse than ever we could have imagined. Since I was here last year, the high street has been completely decimated even further. With many cases, shops closing, and they're outnumbering those on the high street that are still able to open, even though they're hanging on by a shoestring. In the last eight months, analysis by the Centre of Retail Research has shown 125,515 retail jobs have been axed, and 13,867 shops have permanently closed across high streets, shopping centres and retail parks. Each one of those jobs is a personal tragedy to that individual worker. And store closures are scarring our high streets up and down the country and their communities. Just in the last few weeks, we have seen more than 4,000 jobs at risk, with Boots planning to cut 7% of its workforce within the retail head office and its opticians. Selfridges set to reduce its total headcount by 14%. WH Smith's cutting 1,500 jobs. M&Co shutting 47 stores with a loss of just under 400 jobs. 7,000 redundancies in M&S. Pizza Express cutting over 1,000 jobs and closing 73 of their restaurants permanently. And the list is growing on a daily basis. Now, we're aware of the key issues facing retailers, especially those in non-food businesses. Still have to pay rates, rent, labour costs, compete with the rapid growth of online, and also, the competition, from the normal stores. But most of all, far outweighing all this, as we've just heard in the two previous speakers, we've got COVID. COVID, the lockdown, which deprived those businesses of 2/3 of their income. However, this cannot be right that many of these employers think that it's okay to use this pandemic as an excuse, and I'm going to say an excuse, to brutally cull their workforce and attack their pay and conditions. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because they want to protect their profits. It's absolutely outrageous. And it can't be, it mustn't continue. It's got to stop in its tracks. I have two examples of this. Now, Rob mentioned earlier about IKEA and Ritchie. So we've got Debenhams. Now, Debenhams, who closed all their 11 stores in Ireland, and thought it was okay to sack their hard-working staff by email. The same has now happened here in England, with the furloughed workers literally sacked either by email or by text, given no notice, no consultation, no redundancy, just 3 days' pay. It's an absolute outrage and a disgrace, and it has got to be stopped. Debenhams workers in Ireland have been protesting for well over 100 days now, and weekly protests are now starting to take place throughout the UK outside Debenhams stores. In the case of IKEA, Richie Venton, our store executive councillor for Scotland and our store shop steward and convener in IKEA in Glasgow, has been viciously sacked for opposing changes IKEA were implementing to their sick pay. These changes included removal of wages from those forced into self-isolation because of COVID, putting them on company sick benefit. But this is where it comes in. The sick pay that many of the workers were excluded from under an absence threshold, so instead having to rely on the measly weekly statutory sick pay. Again, totally outrageous. Ritchie was sacked purely for opposing these cuts to their sick pay and demanding full average wages for these staff with COVID, and for informing, this is why he was sacked, for blowing the whistle to his members on what they were intending to do. This is a blatant attack on a trade union activist and must not be allowed to continue. We cannot allow companies like Debenhams and IKEA to continue to use the pandemic as an excuse to attack our workers and also our trade union activists. Because if we do, it will continue and other companies will follow suit. We know how it works. So in conclusion, we need the government, this wonderful, caring, sharing Tory bunch of idiots, to level the playing field on taxation between online and the high street. Reform business rates that are strangling so many businesses, as well as funding councils to breathe new life into town centres and make them the community hubs they once were. I put it to this wonderful government, Knock, do you want to save the high street, or do you actually want to see it go to the wall? Because if they don't act soon, that's exactly where it'll end up. As a trade union movement, we need to look at where we can unite our struggles, and the TUC must step up and bring us together. COVID is not going away. Anyone that thinks that is living in cloud cuckoo land. We must work together against redundancies, closures, attacks on our members, and attacks on our trade union activists. As has already been said, an attack on them is an attack on us, and one which we must put a stop to. Just before I finish, can I please urge you all to support the Debenhams workers' protests? And in the case of Richie, please sign Richie Benton's petition to get him reinstated. This trade union activist, you know, what they're doing to him is so wrong and on all counts and must be stopped. And just as a word of solidarity from me to every worker, every union that's in struggle, everyone that is trying to get justice for their workers, I stand in full solidarity to you. And as already been said, we must keep fighting. We cannot let this go. More now than ever, we have to fight back. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy, very much for that. And Richie's petition is in the chat for anybody that hasn't already signed it. We'll keep publicising that for all the issues affecting retail workers as well. So anything we can do, we'll do that. So our next speaker is Assistant General Secretary of the RMT, the union that helped found the NSSN all those many years ago. You know, I think Mick Lynch was due to speak, but unfortunately not able to speak today, but we very much welcome the Assistant General Secretary, Steve Hedley, to this rally. Steve?
Yes, well, thank you, Chair. And I want to correct you, Senior Assistant General Secretary. And I've been restored to my position until our AGM, which is coming up. And I would like to start off by showing solidarity with everybody here that's in struggle. And they are too numerous to actually name. But one group of workers I do want to flag up is the workers from Tower Hamlets Council who have been sacked and put on the inferior contracts in what I can only describe as an absolutely disgraceful decision. I'm a member of the Labour Party, and I think that the fact that the Labour Council has done this is absolutely incredible and needs to be reversed as soon as possible. Now, I'm here from the RMT, and like you all, we are facing not just a recession, but a depression. That's what has been forecast. And we've got on the horizon thousands of job cuts, if not tens of thousands of job cuts in our industry. We're already seeing them. Since I've taken over and I'm acting General Secretary now because Mick Cash is off sick, we have had the employers phoning me up telling me there's going to be redundancies, that the final salary pension schemes that we have are now under attack. And of course, the bosses, the employers and the government are going to use this crisis in order to attack working class people, to put them out of jobs, to attack their terms and conditions under the banner of this COVID crisis, and to bring in the changes that they've been wanting to bring in for the past 10 years, if not more. So this is a clear attack on our class and a clear attack on trade unionists. For those of you who live in London, we have a situation where after November, the guarantee for the funding of Transport for London is not there. The government are trying to blackmail the mayor, and they're bringing in driverless trains, and they're making massive cuts right across Transport for London, including the London Underground. On the other hand, the private railway companies are getting bailed out to the tunes of billions of pounds. And this money is going straight from the taxpayer, being filtered through the government and out into the pockets of shareholders in the private companies. So there's an easy solution to what's happening on our railways and in the buses and in every other sector that we operate in, especially the seafaring sector. If these companies say that they cannot survive without making drastic cuts to terms, conditions and wages, then we must renationalise all these companies. We bring them into public ownership, because it's an absolutely ridiculous and absurd situation where people are being thrown under the dole when businesses are already being subsidised by the government, and those businesses are still paying out millions of pounds per year to their shareholders. It's absolutely intolerable and will have to be brought to a stop. On the subject of the TUC, we have, and we hope to go to the TUC tomorrow and Tuesday, and we hope to achieve the unity, not just to fight these cuts in words, but to fight these cuts in deeds. And of course there will be a political struggle, and of course there will be a propaganda struggle, and there will be a campaigning struggle. But unless all these struggles are built round the credible threats and the credible ability to deliver industrial action, they will come to nothing. And we've had it right and clear from our members all across the transport industry that they are not prepared to sit back and that their hard-won jobs and conditions be taken away by this appalling government, and that they want to fight in whatever means necessary to keep those terms, conditions and jobs. And what we should be doing actually is employing more people. That's the way to stop this crisis, not people being furloughed and thrown under the dole. We need building workers building properties. We need building workers building houses, council houses for people to live in. We need new schools and we need new hospitals. And when people are back working in a socially distanced fashion, then the problems that we're experiencing will not be exacerbated, they actually will be diminished. But I have to say this, if the TUC are incapable of giving a lead, and I hope they're not, I hope they do give a lead and do organise coordinated industrial action as part of a larger campaign to stop these attacks. If they are incapable, then the unions have to step up, and the unions have to form a coalition of unions who are prepared to fight this onslaught from the government. And we have to plan for coordinated action right across industry in order to stop these attacks. So that's the task we are faced with, brothers and sisters. We're going to the TUC with demands that they organise the fight back. But if they don't organise the fight back, your job as shop stewards will be to go into your unions and make sure the leadership of your unions, backed up by the rank and file, will be able to deliver a coalition right across industry of the broadest possible scope that we can actually put on action that will defend our members and the interests of the working class. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks, Steve, and obviously Senior Assistant General Secretary of the RMT. Our last speaker officially from the unions today, very pleased to welcome Howard Beckett, Assistant General Secretary of Unite, speaking on behalf of Len McCluskey. Howard, over to you.
Thanks, Katrine, and thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to speak at the National Shop Stewards Network. In many ways, it's reflective of what the TUC once was, whenever you have so many activists and so many union voices debating the issues of the day rather than just blindly passing motions that no one acts upon. And Rob is quite right whenever he says that this particular TUC is a pivotal TUC. I'm not sure we've ever faced one that is more important. Katrine, everybody has touched on and covered the issue of our employment rights and how vulnerable workers have found themselves during this crisis. And I want to emphasise that too. Our workers, our trade union members have saved this country. Many of them have lost their lives for COVID in order to keep this country going. And now the narrative is very swiftly moving on to workers paying the price of COVID with their wages and with redundancy. And as Rob touched on, nowhere is that more obvious than British Airways. I lead for the union in respect of our dispute for British Airways, so can talk with confidence in respect of whether or not there was a need for British Airways to go down the path that they went down, and there absolutely was not. Our members, under their existing terms and conditions, made £1.92 billion for British Airways the year before the COVID crisis. £1.92 billion on their terms and conditions. British Airways is obviously part of the IAG group, and their profit in the year before COVID amounted to 66% of the entire profit of the IAG group. And of course, no one in the IAG group, not in Aer Lingus, not in IAG itself, faced anything like the cuts that were proposed to Unite members in British Airways. And if British Airways had been successful in respect of their cuts that they proposed in regard to their Section 188s, they would have achieved a cost saving of less than 4% of the entire IAG group. That's less than 4%. So anybody who thinks that the actions of British Airways are anything other than ideologically driven is mistaken. These are cuts that are intended to take the opportunity of COVID, drastically restructure British Airways, reduce the terms and conditions of our members, tear up every single recognition agreement that we have, every single negotiated agreement that Unite and previous unions have negotiated with British Airways to be torn up. And importantly, these new contracts that are being forced on the members are all to have layoff clauses in them. In some cases, layoff clauses of up to 24 weeks were proposed. Effectively, zero-hour contracts through the back door. This is what the fire and rehire proposals of British Airways are fundamentally about. And it's the worst of employment practices in countries that have already had the worst of employment practices in Europe. But obviously, Unite is fighting back in respect of that. The fire and rehire in many of the sections of British Airways is not happening. There's still work to be done, but it is not happening. And it should be no coincidence to anybody that it is not happening because of the fact that we held a socially distanced mass rally at Bedfont for the ground staff. Over 1,500 people turned up and unanimously voted for industrial action. And that statement has resonated with British Airways. They have suddenly realised that we have not gone away. There remains a force of trade union collectivism, and that force of trade union collectivism is going to fight back. But Katrine, COVID has not gone away, unfortunately. We do now face the perfect storm of schools having opened, universities reopening, and of course, workers being forced back into the workplace because of the end of the job retention scheme. We're seeing over 3,500 people a day on official statistics of contracting COVID. That's official statistics. It will be much higher than that. We know that there are over 60 schools where there is already a pandemic outbreak. And we know that the cases are spiralling in care homes again. And it will be the elderly, it will be the most vulnerable, it will be workers, and it will be the disabled whose lives are again put at risk. 2 in 3 people who have died of COVID have had a disability. That's the reality of these government's actions. They are prepared to see the death of the disabled and the vulnerable and the elderly. They, frankly, are putting profit before people. So it is time for the trade unions to step up. And I'm pleased to hear so many of the trade unions on this call talk about collective action, talk about the organisation within the TUC, talk about the fact that we have to interact with each other, and it is all trade unions who must take action. Because one of the things that most frightens me is how quickly the narrative moved after the first peak of COVID. How quickly we moved from clapping for the NHS, talking of key workers, to a state where even trade union leaders were talking about the inevitability of redundancies and facing of recession. And I do not accept that there is inevitability of redundancies, and I do not accept that this country or that our countries are facing recession. I accept the narrative that Dave Ward has given, that there is an alternative way through. And Unite has been fighting during this pandemic. We have had over 20 places of work that have walked out because of the fears over health and safety. 17 of them were meat factories. We have not had a single repudiation, not just during this COVID crisis, but in the last 10 years. And it's time now for other unions to step forward with us and for us to take the type of collective industrial action that we're talking of. So this week at the TUC, we do need to be very clear over our demands. And our first demand must be of health and safety. This rush to get workers back to work has to be rejected when workers' health and safety is put at risk. All of our workers, all of our members everywhere must be reminded about their rights to go to a safe workplace, their rights to come home from work, their right not to die because they are carrying out work. That is section 44 to section 100, and it is written into the Human Rights Act. Our people are entitled to go to work and to come home safely. And the TUC must emphasise that this week. And comrades, we must call for schools to be shut. It isn't right that teachers' lives are put at risk. We have moved seamlessly into a narrative where people are accepting that schools are open, despite the fact that we have over 60 now where infections are widespread in schools. We know that the rise in COVID is related to young people coming home with the disease, and we know it is our people in multi-occupancy houses, different generations in the same household. We know it is our people whose lives will be put at risk. The Tories don't care about the education of the young. They know that the privileged children will be educated throughout this crisis. Frankly, they want the children back at work in school because they want workers back in work. We know that is the truth. And to not raise this as an issue risks the lives of our members. Schools should be shut until such time as we have effective testing or until such time as we have an effective cure. And frankly, the government should be moving to broadband and moving to facilitate home working in order that we can get through this crisis. We must see the job retention scheme extended. And I make this plea to everybody on this Zoom, and I make this plea to Labour Party. Do not call it a furlough scheme. It is a job retention scheme. It started off life being called a job retention scheme. It is still that. It needs to retain jobs or it has failed. We know it is failing. We know that employers such as British Airways are using the job retention scheme to give notice to their employees, to make people redundant and to fire and rehire their employees. It is failing. We know in other countries around Europe that they've extended it for up to 2 years. We know that they have conditions attached to it whereby employers cannot make people redundant when they're in receipt of government money. These are the demands that we must make. It is a matter of days away before we will see the end of the job retention scheme, because it is not the 31st of October whenever it finishes. It is the 25th of September when you will see people give their statutory notice to all of our members in order to use the extended period of October to run down people's notice on their contracts as so as they are redundant on the 1st of November. So we must act now as a TUC collective and demand that the job retention scheme is extended and demand that it is job specific. And that is an immediate demand that we must make of government, or government must face the repercussions of mass industrial action. And we must threaten mass industrial action. The reason why British Airways are negotiating in respect of their terms and conditions is because they are faced with the threat of industrial action. And everywhere we must threaten coordinated industrial action in order to stop the end of the job retention scheme. And we must own our narrative. We must not talk about the inevitability of redundancies, and we must not talk about recession. We must talk of an alternative way. And as a collective TUC, it is our responsibility to force Labour to come on to this territory, to force our politicians to also talk the same narrative. How simple is it for them to say that austerity has failed? It has failed to produce jobs where people have rights. COVID has seen people lose their lives who should not have lost their lives, that there is blood on the hands of government, and that there is a vision for a future that is very different. There is a future that is green, that sees investment in jobs, that sees trade union jobs, that sees the nationalisation of those industries that frankly should always have been in national hands. That is the narrative that Labour and our politicians must give. That is not presenting a detailed manifesto 3.5 years out from an election. That is owning a vision that says that jobs are at the core of what we deserve. Good jobs, trade union jobs, jobs that pay us fairly is at the core of a society that we demand to live in. And Katrine, I will finish with this. There will be many people on this Zoom who know that collective action has changed their own lives with their own employers. There are ships built today on the Clyde, not because of politicians, not because of Westminster, but because trade unionists took action. There are ships being built in Harland and Wolff today because members of Unite took action and occupied Harland and Wolff and refused to allow their lives to be stacked on the stack heap. We must say the same throughout the country now, that trade unionism together, collectively, can change people's lives and make society better. Thank you, Katrine.
Thanks, Howard, and very much appreciate that. And I think certainly that is a very strong message that we would want to be heard in the TUC Congress next week. So we're opening the floor to the participants of this Zoom meeting and the Shop Stewards Network, and there's a whole range of disputes as well that we also want to make sure are covered. The first person I'm going to call is Tony Smith, who's a victimised Unison rep in Hull. Tony.
I'm going to speak first, Katrine, with your permission. Tony and myself are together. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay,
my name's Mike Whale. I'm the president of Hull Trades Council, and I'd like to start by bringing fraternal greetings from Hull Trades Council to this NSSN lobby rally from trade unions in Hull. I'm here to introduce Tony Smith and also to ask for the support of this rally and the activists in the NSSN for Tony, because Tony is a victimised activist who's been dismissed by the multinational company FCC, a Spanish multinational company. He's clearly been victimised. Tony, you may remember, led a dispute in FCC 2 years ago, which was based in Hull, but actually won health provision and sick pay for 2,500 FCC workers up and down the country. FCC leech off the public services. They make huge profits on the backs of our rates and exploit workers. And they've never forgiven Tony for being the leader of the group that actually defeated them. And I have to say, with the help of the NSSN as well, that dispute was won. But since then, and Tony will speak and explain what has happened, Tony has been dismissed, and his appeal against dismissal is on Tuesday. Now, in Hull, we will be organising a collective protest. A number of speakers have already said we need a collective response to individual problems. We will be organising a collective protest outside of FCC for the duration of the protest. But our dispute or our protest will go beyond that, irrespective of the result on Tuesday. Because it's unacceptable, comrades. It's unacceptable to have these private companies exploiting workers and taking advantage of the services that they run for their own good. And we'll be putting pressure on Hull City Council to bring FCC back, or to bring waste disposal back into public ownership. So that campaign will go on. Now, Tony needs your support. He needs you on Monday and Tuesday to post wherever you are as much about him as you can on social media. There's links in the latest NSSN bulletin. There's posters that you can download, that you can put up to show your support for him. Please send your messages of support to Tony. Now, Tony is now going to speak and explain exactly what has happened that has led up to this situation.
Hello, thanks for inviting me to speak at the NSSN. I'm a Unison workplace health and safety rep. Like Mike's already pointed out, I led the strike, me and another union rep, to fight for sick pay, which we eventually won, which was in July 2018. We got the result. But obviously, after going back to work, it's just been hell for me, coming after me all the time. In the 2 years since the strike, I was suspended for 6 months on trumped up charges. And then I went back to work. There was looking for reasons all the time. You know, it was complete pressure all the time from the employer. And then on January the 17th of this year, I was suspended again for another just over 6 months, which led to my dismissal on the 29th of July. I've got full support of all the workforce. You know, they all know themselves. It's all trumped up charges and what have you. But the main point I want to go across is about, especially Labour councils, because they are a multinational company, is about procuring contracts to companies like these who are just attacking local workers. I mean, no doubt I'm not the only one across the country who's been treated like this by FCC environment, and ultimately councils should not be giving contracts to ruthless companies like this who are cutting on health and safety costs at the expense of workers. The main reason they came after me is that I raised an issue regarding the disposal of asbestos, and the best way I can describe it is of members of the public going to household recycling sites, fly tipping asbestos in any bin. You know, it might be in a wood bin, it might be in a rubble bin, it could be in a scrap bin, it could be fly tipping asbestos. Then when the employer finds out it's gone in there, what they're doing is getting minimum wage workers to take the asbestos out and then sending that bin away as not a contaminated waste bin, but as a rubble bin, a wood bin, or whatever it may be. And all I was asking for was risk assessments and safe working procedures to be put in place for the drivers who were taking these bins to the disposal points. It was obvious the reason they didn't want to give us them, because you can imagine a driver with a load of rubble turning up at a disposal point and start putting a white suit on. The first thing they're going to ask is, why are you putting a white suit on? Well, this bin's had asbestos in it. So then they're not going to accept it. And the reason behind that is that the difference in cost between disposing a rubble bin and an asbestos contaminated bin is about £700. So obviously FCC are cutting right across that to save money, basically, getting the contracts and then cutting the costs at the expense and health and safety of workers. My main issue there was at the disposal point, the people who was receiving it was then putting it through a crusher. Obviously 20 years down the line, if somebody gets asbestosis, there's no trail for that, because it's gone as rubble. It hasn't gone as a contaminated bin. So that was my main concern. And obviously I was raising these issues all the time. And rather than solve it and give us risk assessments and safe working procedures and do it the right way, they came after me and ultimately sacked me. And that's where we're at the moment. So that's it, basically.
Thanks very much, both of you, and especially Tony. And I think certainly there's work for all of us to do to make sure we publicise this as much as possible before Tuesday as well. So we'll make sure we issue reminders on that. So I just remind everybody as well that we are live on Facebook. Be aware of that when you're making comments as well. The next person I want to call in is Kirsty Brewerton from NHS Say No, and obviously we saw the fantastic protests yesterday following on from the ones that took place in August. Kirsty?
Hi, thank you for having me. As you say, I'm Kirsty Brewerton. I'm a clinical sister in the NHS and an activist for the NHS Say No campaign. So yesterday we did our protest, which it went pretty well, and I was there with Dave Nellis, who kindly invited me to join you guys today. So I just want to say thank you for your support. The solidarity shown by trade unions, MPs and members of the public to our plight has been invaluable. There is power in our voice being heard and understood, and finally we feel as though our voice is resonating across the country. The NHS Say No campaign grew from years of frustration and misrepresentation. The powers that be using our workforce and professions as bargaining tools to win votes when needed, with their promises as hollow as the clapping every Thursday. When it was announced that most NHS workers were excluded from the latest public pay sector increases, they lit the torch. And an uprising like I've never seen in my nursing career erupted. Finally, some sort of reaction to the constant hammering from this government. What began as a Facebook group of incensed colleagues who were trying to make a difference has grown to almost 85,000 members. A month ago we marched, yesterday we stood, and the message is the same: 15% pay increase for all NHS workers. The response from Matt Hancock and the government is to remind us of the scam they call a 3-year pay deal, which we should all be apparently grateful for. The manipulation of maths by the Tory party is astounding, always skewed to paint a picture that fits their rhetoric. However, they are trying to manipulate the wrong workforce. We're pretty good at numbers. If we fiddled the maths like they do, our patients would pay the price. We work to a code of conduct and hold professional ethics as an essential discipline with our roles. And it would be nice to think that those making these huge decisions would demonstrate the same discipline. So we are left disputing those in power regarding this supposed pay deal. And it's been eye-opening for me personally to see this blatant manipulation of facts. The pay deal was skewed to be beneficial to newly qualified staff. Those more experienced hardly felt an increase at all. And this year it will be a whopping almost 1.7 for most staff, which is a long way off the 15% that Matt Hancock purported a couple of months ago, and is nowhere near in line with inflation. He conveniently missed out that this government have awarded themselves the 8th pay rise in a decade of austerity, and their cheeky COVID bonus of £10,000 and the £50,000 he claimed in expenses last year. Following the pressure from NHS Say No, the unions have begun to align their campaigns. GMB is now 15%, Unite is 15%, RCN is 12.5%, and Unison are asking for £2,000 for each worker. Whilst this is massively positive, it's not enough. We all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet and work together. This government cannot be given a reason to manipulate the numbers. We are so much stronger together. For a long time, we've felt disempowered, disillusioned and despondent, but we have proved with the NHS Say No campaign that we do have a voice. We're so passionate about advocating for those we care for, and it's time we started advocating for ourselves. For years, the NHS has been desecrated by the Tory government, slowly and slyly picked apart, chronically underfunded and undervalued. The entire NHS workforce proved that despite this, when faced with a global pandemic, we can adapt and we can overcome. Despite their failings, we battled on with inadequate PPE, literally risking our lives to save others, whilst procurement of essential equipment was hindered by corrupt contracts allocated purely through nepotism. Mates rates where I'm from usually means you get a bargain rather than spaffing billions up the wall on non-existent or useless products. Yet there is apparently no money left on that magical money tree for a pay rise for NHS workers. The hypocrisy is unreal. Rather than investing in their mates' harebrained schemes, invest in the experts who've been doing the job for years. Without this workforce, there is no NHS. We are already 100,000 members of staff short, and nothing they have done over recent years has made any change to retention. For the skills and the experience needed for these professions, we deserve a fair wage. Claps don't pay the bills, and unfortunately we can't charge expenses for the extortionate car parking fees we're charged to go to work. And we couldn't claim a 10k bonus to help equip us for COVID working, and our pay deal was a farce. It's time we were valued for our profession. So I ask you to stand with us and fight for 15%. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty. And obviously NIPSA as well in Northern Ireland are fully back in the 15% as well. So I think the more unions do that, the better. Our next speaker, another health professional, Jonathan Fluxman from Doctors in Unite, to give us better information than we are getting in the media, quite frankly, in terms of the health risks in workplaces. Jonathan?
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation today. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to share the platform with all the speakers that have come before me, and it's actually really inspiring to hear what people are saying. And just before I start, message of solidarity to Tony and all the other workers who've been unfairly sacked for standing up for themselves and workers' rights. And we stand with you shoulder to shoulder. So I'm a retired GP. I'm a member of Doctors in Unite, and I also am a rep on the Brent Trades Council in Northwest London. I wanted to talk to you today very briefly about how COVID is transmitted, because as we've seen throughout the pandemic, the messaging from the government has been dreadful, and in fact, it's grossly misleading. COVID-19 is an indoor disease. It spreads through the air, and it does not respect the 2-meter rule. And it's really important to remember this, because we're given the impression that all you have to do is stand 2 meters away from somebody, indoors or outdoors, and you're safe. And we've seen all over the world, and increasingly in this country as well, that outbreaks are happening, particularly in the workplace, where a bit of black and yellow tape on the floor does not protect you. The TUC actually produced a report just on Friday, which was a survey of workers, and they showed that less than half of workplaces have actually done anything to introduce proper social distancing into the workplace, let alone think about how to combat airborne spread. So just getting back to the airborne spread bit, for months and months now, aerosol scientists have been saying that the current guidance and advice that people are getting is wrong. Yes, the disease can be spread by coughing and sneezing and by contact spread, and those two routes are important. But it seems increasingly clear that the dominant method of spread is actually tiny aerosols. Like if you imagine cigarette smoke from somebody who's smoking, that the virus lives in tiny little moisture particles that can travel and are suspended in the air and can travel over long distances, much greater than 2 meters, depending on the airflow. And the other thing to appreciate is that COVID is an indoor disease, okay? If you're outdoors, you're pretty safe, unless you're literally in each other's faces. But overwhelmingly, the outbreaks of COVID-19 happen indoors. The smaller the room, the more the people, the worse the ventilation, the longer time you spend in the space, the greater the risk. And there are some very well described outbreaks internationally that are very well known in the medical literature, such as the restaurant in Guangzhou in China, the call center in Seoul in South Korea, and the choir meeting in Washington, which showed pretty conclusively that people well in excess of 2 meters got infected, usually by 1 or 2 people, because they shared the same indoor space. The second point, major point I wanted to make to you was the government's claim that the workplace is safe, it is COVID secure, is, I'm afraid, just more Tory lies, okay? If you look at the outbreaks that have happened just in the last 3 months, I did a little search on Google the other day after Hancock went on TV and said, oh, don't worry, we've done everything we can, the workplace is COVID secure. I mean, Howard has mentioned that there have been 17 meatpacking plants in this country that have had outbreaks. In my little Google search, I found a number of others. So combined, there's probably in excess of 20, just 15 minutes on Google, I found these. All over the country, all kinds of different workplaces. So we cannot assume that the workplace is safe just because the government is telling us this. In fact, it's very, very difficult to make something completely safe from this virus. It's an incredibly difficult virus to eradicate and to get complete protection. There's one concept that I want to just talk a little bit about, because I think it's important. In your workplaces, you're all shop stewards and union reps and things like that. In your workplaces, if there is an outbreak and you see that there are a large number of workers getting infected over a short period of time, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, something like that, that is almost certainly because of spread within the workplace. And it goes under this term called a super spreader event. And there's a lot of research going into collecting a database of these events. So what's been happening is government and employers, and unfortunately even public health doctors, are blaming workers for these outbreaks. I mean, we had Sarah from the Bakers Union talking to us a bit about what happened at Greencore in Northampton. Now, Doctors in Unite, we've done a careful study of that outbreak and compared it to a report, a very detailed and interesting report of a similar outbreak in a meatpacking plant in Germany, where they showed conclusively that the spread was within the factory. And the spread was more than 8 meters away from the one worker who brought the infection into the factory. It is not due to workers sharing accommodation. It is not due to workers sharing smoke breaks outside. And it's not due to workers not social distancing. It's because they all occupy the same indoor space, the same air that is not being ventilated, and the aerosol spread of the virus is being transmitted in that space over long distances. So if you find yourself in your workplace with that kind of outbreak, it's almost certainly a super spreader event, and it's the ventilation in the plant that is responsible, or the lack of it. And as I say, we've seen the most disgraceful blaming and scapegoating of workers, including racist scapegoating of East European workers in the Northampton thing. We've seen it in Leicester, where the Asian community was blamed by that awful Tory MP in Parliament. But it is the cause of this, or the underlying problem, is the lack of attention to ventilation and replacing stale air with outside fresh air. The third thing I wanted to say to you was, please get involved in health and safety in the workplace. You cannot leave it to the employer, as we've seen, and you cannot leave it to the government. In fact, the government has just completely abrogated its responsibility and given up on it. It's handed it over to employers. We know what employers are like. Some of them are good, and some of them are dreadful. And they will put your lives at risk because they will not be bothered to do it. So when you're in the workplace, look around. Beware of enclosed small offices with no windows. If you're all in a big enclosed space, and ask about the ventilation, what's going on in the workplace. If you have no health and safety rep, maybe take on the responsibility. Talk to your regional office, talk to your union head office about it. Ask your employer what's being done about the ventilation system and the aircon system. And the last point I wanted to make to you was, please wear a mask at work. Again, the messaging has been so bad from this government that lots of people think that masks are a waste of time. They are not. They work, and they are an extremely important tool in combating this virus in the workplace. So I'll end there, and I just wanted to thank you again. I wish you good luck for your critically important conference going forward, and solidarity from us in Doctors to Unite to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And I think certainly it's something that I think we're all very much pushing. We've just found one of the largest government departments has been found in breach of health and safety legislation. So the government can't even put its own house in order, let alone enforce health and safety elsewhere. So, you know, we need, as a movement, we need to make sure our workplaces are safe. Our next contributor is Jared Wood. Obviously, we're trying to fit as many people in as possible in a reasonably short period of time. So if people can try and keep their contributions reasonably brief, to less than 4 minutes, that would be really useful. Thanks, Jared. You're muted still, Jared. Hang on. Okay.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Right, thanks. It's obviously an extremely concerning period that we're in here, but I have to say that I've found this rally so far to be one of the most encouraging and inspiring that I've been involved in for a long time. And the reason I say that is that speaker after speaker has recognised that we have to move on from an acceptance of the narrative of making cuts and accepting that we're in a financial crisis that we can't avoid, and also there seems to be a growing agreement, acceptance amongst people, certainly in this group, that if no one else is going to step up and change that narrative and put something else on the table, then it's us that have to do that. The RMT's recently agreed a redundancy policy that we've been discussing, which is very similar really to many other things people here have been talking about. We're opposing the logic of any redundancies, pay cuts or attacks on conditions. We're demanding job security agreements to protect jobs and pay and conditions with employers. We're saying that no redundancies, no pay cuts should be a requirement put on any company that receives public subsidy. We're saying that any company providing public transport services that claims to be unable to maintain jobs should be immediately nationalised. We're calling for a new public transport authority to coordinate public transport on a basis of public ownership and democratic control. And of course, we also represent maritime members, and we're demanding the retraining and reskilling of maritime workers, and for no redundancies in that sector as well. And we want to take that into the TUC and argue that the TUC should apply the same principle right across British industry and British commerce, and any company claiming that they can't maintain jobs and conditions should have their books opened up to the scrutiny of the trade union movement, and either forced to use the money that they've got, or nationalised if that is a better alternative to maintain jobs and conditions. But I want to come on to the question that Dave Ward raised, because I think it's the crucial one. How do we mobilise workers at this time? And we've found that there is an inevitable lack of confidence amongst workers facing redundancy. There is a fear that they can't really effectively fight it at this time. And so it's absolutely essential that throughout the movement that we transform that debate, and that we get to members and explain to them how we can fight, how there is still wealth in society. Look at the way that the wealthiest 1,000 people in this country have doubled their wealth more than once since the 2008 crisis. It's not the case that we're on our knees as an economy. What is the case is that the capitalist system as it is on its knees, and they want us to pay for that. And so we've got to get on the front foot and try and get that confidence. And I think we can only do that by putting bold demands, by trying to appear reasonable with the employers, by backing down to the claims of the employers at their skin. We can't give people the idea that there's a different way of doing things. And that's why I think that the proposal from the TUC for a National Recovery Council is not sufficient. You really, if you look at what that's talking about, it's a sort of ideas of German co-determination of workers having a say in what the bosses do to try and recover, in how the bosses should invest, etc. But quite plainly, that is not going to protect workers. It's not protecting German workers from austerity and recession at the moment. It won't protect us. Look at this debate they're having at the moment about Boris wanting to defend his right to make state support for industry. Now, why is that? Has Boris suddenly decided that he wants some sort of social democratic future? Of course not. What they want to do is put state support into the dividends and the income of the wealthy and to prop up the banking system, etc. That's why they want the freedom to put in massive state support. And we've got to argue that it's a completely different type of state support that supports working people. The final point I want to make is this. Our union and many other unions here have the idea of socialism as part of our constitution. And I think that in the months and the year going forwards, raising the idea of a socialist alternative is going to be absolutely fundamental to explaining to workers on a practical level how we get out of this crisis. If we have to make the point that if capitalism cannot maintain jobs and conditions, then we cannot maintain capitalism. And we can't be afraid to raise those points. It will be a life and death matter for many workers to go beyond the constraints of the market and what the banks are telling us and what the big bosses are telling us. And if we confront that argument, then we will determine where the battle lines are drawn, what debate we have going forwards. That it's a debate about really protecting jobs and conditions and not limiting the damage that capitalism can do. And if we can build an alliance of the willing based on that, then I think that we can transform the situation in Britain.
Thanks, Jared. Our next contributor is Ethan.
Am I unmuted, comrades?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, comrades?
Yeah, you can hear you and see you.
Great. It's great to hear people saying the things they're saying. I've got a quick question. Last year, my daughter was working for Mothercare, and at first glance, it didn't appear that there was any sort of organisation going on there at all. But I found that they were actually using WhatsApp as a way to talk about social things, but also talk about the fundamentals of terms and conditions and stuff like that. Now, it's bound to be workers across the country who are coming to these conclusions and seeing the need to form structure, because capitalism will always drive people towards doing that. I ask myself, do we have enough of a strategy to target these workers? Personally, I think we should be using the mainstream media a bit more than we actually are. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ethan. And Rob will be coming in at the end as well, so I'm sure he'll cover some points, what we can do about the unorganised workers. Okay, Stuart Richardson next. I think you've just muted yourself. Right, there you are. You're fine. Yeah, you're unmuted. Okay, perhaps we'll go on to somebody else. Theo, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Just quickly, and thanks everyone. Well, we've heard a lot, obviously, today about the efforts that the bosses and the Tory government are making currently to make working class people pay the effects of this new economic crisis. But within that, of course, as well, young people and in particular young workers are facing a very, very acute crisis. It's been reported a lot and I think discussed a lot in these meetings. The mass youth unemployment crisis, which is currently mounting, which is expected to hit 1 million unemployed young people by the end of this year. Young people and young workers were some of the first to start losing their jobs, of course, in the lockdown, particularly in the service sector. And if you're a young worker, you're the most likely actually to have lost your job or to have suffered a collapse in your income during and after the lockdown. And without what we in the NSSN are discussing today, without a serious strategy for a trade union fight back, industrial action, young people face a future essentially with no access whatsoever to a job, without access to training or apprenticeship schemes for the skills that we need for decent and good work. As of May 2020, there were only 1,850 available apprenticeship schemes available across the country. So it's a dire situation facing young workers. The Tories have responded. Rishi Sunak, at the end of July, unveiled the Tory Kickstart scheme. And I think in the NSSN and the trade union movement as a whole, we have to be absolutely unequivocal that the Kickstart scheme, but for that matter, any of the alternatives or the solutions or so-called solutions being put forward by the Tories are completely and utterly inadequate. They do not offer any kind of future whatsoever, any decent future for young people. The Kickstart scheme itself offers young people 6-month training schemes on the pitifully low youth minimum wage. It doesn't offer young people what we need. It offers young people, if anything, a return to the Tory workfare schemes that we saw introduced back in 2010. So the Young Socialists has been out campaigning this weekend, but we're also campaigning tomorrow and Tuesday as well, up and down the country, collecting the signatures of young workers, of students, but also of trade unionists, of anti-austerity activists. We've been writing to local trades councils and trade union branches because we're running a petition which is calling for the TUC at its meeting this year to start organising a council of war to discuss how the trade union movement can launch a serious campaign to fight for young people's futures. And that includes what we've already discussed in today's meeting. Of course, there has to be a serious industrial strategy to defend every job which is under risk from redundancy. And we back the calls of the NSSN and other speakers in this meeting today who say that the trade union movement should now be putting right to the fore the demands of any firm which is threatening redundancies, which is threatening job losses. Any firm should be forced and made to open the books, and firms which are threatening job cuts should be nationalised as well as part of the strategy to save and to defend jobs. And of course, that is a very, very important discussion to talk about a strategy for how do we defend against job losses. But also, we think we need to have a discussion about what else we need as well. And part of that, we say, has to be fighting for a mass programme of government investment into socially useful job creation, for there to be a sharing out of the work available so that every working class and young person is guaranteed a decent job and a trade union rate of pay. But also, as well as that, for real jobs and training, for real training and apprenticeship schemes for young people as well, for the skills that we need on trade union rates of pay, not the Kickstarter scheme, which offers no future whatsoever for young people. And I'll finish on the point, I think Rob and some other speakers have made it already. If a handful, relatively speaking, a handful of A-level and GCSE students can force the government, the Tory government, into a U-turn, then the TUC, with over 6 million members, workers affiliated to it, can certainly fight for a programme that young people need, and there are no excuses for it not doing that. So thank you.
Thanks, Theo. Next person is Sean Macaulay. Oh, I think it's an NEU rep.
Thank you, Katrine. What education staff face now is unprecedented. From Monday onwards in society generally, we're not allowed to meet in groups of more than 6, but in thousands of classrooms up and down the country from Monday, then you'll have 30 to 35 adults and children crammed together in a confined area. There's no other indoor setting that I'm aware of where the actual guidance that is issued by the government, first of all, recommends no social distancing is necessary in such circumstances, but also that no face coverings are recommended in those circumstances. Now, our members returned last week or the week before with very mixed feelings, a lot of anticipation from the point of view of the expectation of seeing the children that we've not seen for such a long time, but also mixed with fear and anxiety about the risks in the workplace and the dangers in relation to COVID-19. Now, the NEU has always said that we do want to see children back in the classroom, but that has to be done safely, and that has to be done at a time when it is safe to do so as well. Now, the government's moral imperative, as they classed it, has actually been quite clearly exposed as the sham that it always has been. Those children coming back, those children excited to get back into school, how many of those children over the next few weeks will end up being back out of education because they're self-isolating, or because they've actually got COVID-19 themselves. Estimates reckon that there's 543 UK schools and colleges that have been affected by cases in them. 518 pupils have tested positive, and 127 staff. Now, the position of the National Education Union leadership in the run-up to June the 1st, which saw the reopening of primaries in a limited way to certain year groups, was reasonably strong. It was a position that was clear. A lead was given, information and clarity around the question of your rights in the workplace, in particular around Section 44, were made very, very clear to members at that time. The union was able to mobilise its members. We had sectional, district, regional and national meetings for lay officers, for reps, for members. There's one very famous meeting that's been reported throughout the trade union movement of 15,000 people on a Zoom call with the joint general secretaries. And obviously that pressure, that involvement of the membership and throughout the whole of the country and throughout the whole of the union, kept that pressure on the leadership of the union to maintain that combative tone and to force an embarrassing, really, defeat on the government. When they opened schools, primary schools in June the 1st, it was not done in the way that the government had been hoping that it would be done. Average daily attendance during that period was only 30% of the eligible year groups to be back. Parents were cautious, head teachers were cautious, and that was as a result of the position that the National Education Union took at that particular time. This is not a stable government that we're facing at this point, despite its majority, and I think that's been exposed really by the marvellous protests of A-level students, forcing the government into again another extremely embarrassing U-turn. They've shown the way in many ways. Unfortunately, that tone that's been struck by the leadership of the union has not always been as consistent as one might hope. But the most active and campaigning districts over the summer period and now as well, supporters of the National Shop Stewards network within the National Education Union have continued to organise, mobilise and pressure. And over the past few days, it's been pleasing to see there's been a re-emergence of a clearer message on safety in the workplace, making the workplace a safe place to be, and a position that we take as an alternative to the current situation. It should be members who decide the policy, and in order to do that, we need to fight to get that message out and to get that message to be put into practice. Now, we're doing that now within the NEU, and in the build-up to what we've got a special conference which replaces the conference that we had that was cancelled earlier on in the year. But in the build-up to that special conference in October, we're campaigning to make sure that the motions, in particular motions on coronavirus and safety in the workplace, is strengthened, so that we have a situation where the national position of the leadership, the national position of the National Education Union is one that does guarantee the safety of members in the workplace. By making a stand and organising, we can affect a considerable amount of change, not just within our own union, but within the workplaces as well.
Thanks, Sean. And clearly, there's plenty to do in terms of the schools, both in our communities, but also with the unions within our schools. Just to remind everybody, thanks everybody that's got their branches to affiliate to the Shop Stewards Network and their unions as well. But we always need funds in terms of keeping our campaigning going and all the things that we need to do at the moment in the restricted times. So there's some details on how you can get your union branch affiliated if it's not already done so in the chat. Next speaker is going to be Kat. Very much welcome, another striker to our rally today, one of the Bullivant NUJ strikers in the West Midlands. Kat, over to you.
Hiya, thank you. Yes, so just really an update and a thank you to everyone that supported our strikes at Bullivant Media. As those who've been following might know, the pandemic has exposed a lot of weaknesses within the company, and rather than being open and honest with us, the employer has kept us completely in the dark and just buried their heads in the sand. And then it's us employees that have taken that blow, and we faced a lot of struggles. One of the first being that we were delayed our payments, our monthly salary payments, which obviously for those with bills to pay, for families to support, has been a real struggle, on top of, you know, similarly to journalists across the country, on top of what is already a very meagre wage. And often we wouldn't be advised until the evening before the day of payment. So, and then we had 5 compulsory redundancies that we faced. But thank you to the NUJ for supporting us with that, because we actually managed to whittle that down to 1, which just really goes to show the power of what forming a chapel union, a union chapel can do. So that was, I mean, obviously having the 1 is still a blow, but that was significantly like a win, I think, overall for us. And one of the other things that's been happening is that we've had case whereby one of the members of the family, it's a family-run company, one of the members of the family who's non-editorial has been encroaching on our work, which has been a real blow. My boss, personally speaking, my boss, who I suppose would be my line manager, he has volunteered to be made redundant, so I'm without him now. And then the redundancy that was made compulsory was probably the other person or another editor I would have gone to. So I'm from a personal point of view feeling incredibly vulnerable at the moment and isolated. They can no longer afford the office I was at, so I am at home at the moment. And so yeah, as I say, I've been feeling very, very vulnerable. And sorry, well, I'm not very used to doing this. So at the moment, we've done 2 strikes, and I've been involved on the picket line, to which all the time we've had negotiations on the table that they have looked at. They say they will consider them as though it's sort of like a favour to us, but so the latest is that they have, we had a meeting on Friday, and the negotiations are pending, so they're coming back to us on Monday with 2 tweaks, a couple of tweaks they say, which could mean anything. So it's all a bit tenuous at the moment. So on Monday we expect to hear back from them what those tweaks will be. This is in relation to editorial protocol, which is a set of sort of regulations we want to impose, which allows editorial to be returned to editorial. Again, this is in relation to the non-editorial family member who's been encroaching on our jobs. And that also relates to the structure. We've had no restructuring plans. As I say, my line manager or my editor has gone. The editor of another paper who I was in the office with has gone. And there's just nobody, no roles, no role titles have been announced. You know, I don't know who my editor is. So it's just in complete tatters. So we're hoping to hear more of that on Monday, and if we're not satisfied, you know, that they've met our very reasonable demands, then we will go ahead and strike on for the 3 days next week, Wednesday to Friday. But I mean, without the support, I mean, before this experience, I've never really appreciated the what trade unions can actually do for you. So it's incredible to know that so many people out there are standing there out in solidarity for us. So it's just been incredibly reassuring, especially at the moment feeling so isolated. So we thank you for that, and for the donations for our journalists at Relevant Media who will be striking and on the picket line possibly next week and the previous weeks, because as journalists will know, times are very hard at the moment, and it's good to know support and financial support it is there. So it's a real reassurance. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kat, that was brilliant. And obviously the strike fund details are now in the chat as well. So anything we can do as a Shop Stewards Network. Stuart, I'll bring you in next as well in terms of this dispute.
Oh, hello, I'm Stuart Richardson. I'm the Treasurer of the Birmingham TUC and Secretary of the Birmingham Stop the War Coalition, and apologies to the Chair for not being present when she called me earlier. I did arrive a bit late for the event, and I don't know if anybody's informed the meeting, which I think is quite important, is that we are going into quite a strong lockdown situation with maximum meetings of 6. But actually, in many ways, surprise, if you read the government guidance, this does not apply to political protests and political demonstrations. If you go to the government guidance, section 210, it's got an explicit statement there that political protests are not banned, but there is an insistence on social distancing. And I think that's useful to report because we in the Stop the War Coalition are able to organise a demonstration next Sunday, 1 o'clock, Marble Arch, to actually protest about the arms supplies to Saudi Arabia. But the main point I wanted to make is this question of Labour councils using the COVID crisis to attack the workforce. We invited a representative of the Tower Hamlets Unison to speak at the Birmingham TUC, and she was very impressive, and I'd recommend inviting to any of your other bodies speakers from Tower Unison. Tower Hamlets Unison, we're able to give them £100 donation. But it's sort of spreading to the West Midlands. In Samwell Council has got an arm's length leisure service, and it is cutting the conditions and pay of a section of its workforce. And the GMB and I think 2 other unions are at present balloting for industrial action to stop these councils doing that. And I think this should be widely publicised, and we should urge the Labour Party members who are here and the Labour Party members who are active in the trade union to take up in the Labour Party the fact that Labour councils are repeating in a more minor way the massive assault on the workforce in British Airways. But I must say I was quite encouraged by some of the comments Howard Beckett made for an established trade union figure to call for sustained industrial action, which I think absolutely is necessary to resist these massive assaults on working conditions and pay in the next period. And that in the end, you only got to stop BA imposing 40, 60% pay increases by an all-out strike, you know. And I think one, although that might be difficult, one's got to pose the question of industrial action seriously in the trade union movement to resist these massive assaults. But thanks for inviting me to speak, and hopefully that was some useful points. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. So we'll just bring in the speakers that have put their hands up, but you know, obviously we're reaching the end of our rally. Next speaker is Padraig Mulholland, Deputy General Secretary of NIPSA, and as I said earlier, one of the other unions is fully back in the 15% for health workers. Padraig.
Hi, Katrine. Hi, comrades. Well, first of all, can I start by bringing greetings to all workers in struggle, to the trade unions represented in NSSN, and to the TUC Conference as well. And in particular, I want to bring greetings to the comrades who are currently under attack or facing victimization or, you know, facing those types of struggles. Tony Smith, Richie Venton, and I think it's worth mentioning as well, Comrade Steve Hedley, who has been in a particularly difficult situation for a period of time. So solidarity to all of those comrades. Hopefully your struggles work out, and please be assured of the support of comrades in NIPSA during your struggles. Can I just perhaps make a few points about the health service struggle that I think is going to open up over the next period of time? It has a particular variation in Northern Ireland, and it might just be worth mentioning a couple of points about Northern Ireland being slightly different than other areas within the National Health Service. In Northern Ireland, we have 3 or 4 particularly big unions in health. They're NIPSA, Unison, RCN, and Unite. Obviously, NIPSA doesn't exist across the water, but NIPSA is significant within the Northern Ireland Health Service. Also, NIPSA is not an affiliate of the TUC. We're an affiliate of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions instead, and we carry out our work through that body, but obviously are very interested in developments within the TUC and stay as connected as we possibly can to them. But what this has meant, this slight difference structurally in the health service and slight difference in the trade union movement in the health service, is events took a different course over the last number of years as far as health service pay was concerned. Our colleagues in the trade unions in the health service in Britain entered into a 3-year deal about 2.5 years ago. That didn't happen in Northern Ireland. Instead, we were faced with a series of 1-year deals. We had parity arrangements with Britain, but the Northern Ireland Assembly had broken those parity arrangements, and what that had meant was our pay had fallen away behind where you guys were. That all came to a head towards the tail end of last year. We then entered into a series of strike actions and actions short of strike action across Northern Ireland to force the Northern Ireland Assembly to change position. And at the end of that series of industrial actions just concluded in March, we had achieved, I think we had achieved significant advances. First of all, parity is now returned, and the Northern Ireland unions are part of the negotiations that will be happening through London. Secondly, we have achieved pay rises that are a catch-up from all the fall behind that we had with yourselves. So for some of our members, that meant as much as 18% pay increase. And thirdly, we had also reached an agreement that guaranteed thousands of additional jobs within the health service in Northern Ireland. It was a very good partial victory, but in NIPSA's view, it was not enough, and the struggle should have continued to achieve more, but the other unions decided to accept. And to be fair, it was a significant partial victory, so perhaps their position is more understandable than positions taken previously by unions who seem to have accepted very little off the table. But in this case, in NIPSA's view in particular, not enough was achieved on the pay issue, and we believe the pay struggle had to continue in one form or other. So therefore, we welcomed the fact that the unions in Britain reopened the question of health service pay before the end of the 3-year deal and sought to bring the pay negotiations forward to November, I think it is. We welcomed that, and we entered then into a process of consultation with our health service members in Northern Ireland about what their preferred options on pay would be. The conclusion of that consultation was we arrived at a figure of either £3,000 or 15%, whichever was higher. That seems like quite a radical position to put, but a bit of a reach, you know, from the point of view of a Tory or from the point of view of somebody who perhaps is in a well-paid job already. But from the point of view of our members and point of view of our trade union activists, it was a modest enough demand. If you think about it, £3,000 in real terms is about 16.9% for the lowest paid health service workers, and it takes them just over £20,000 in their pay on an annual salary. So it's £3,000 is a big step forward, but it certainly does not end the whole issue of poverty pay in the health service. And then the 15% applied to all points across all grades within the health service would be an uplift for all members. We based our calculations for what pay demand to put forward. We based it on, first of all, the chronically low pay in the health service as it currently stands, those below 20,000 or 21,000 a year. We also based it on the 20% we reckon loss of pay since the beginning of austerity for all health service workers. And then finally, we based it on a below inflation pay rise for over 50% of our NIPSA members in this financial year, which we find to be unacceptable. And finally, obviously, the sacrifices health service workers were required to make during the period of COVID, the ongoing sacrifices. So from our point of view, we believe £3,000 or 15% is a modest proposal that is easily arguable with the public and hopefully easily arguable with the other unions. And my understanding is the other unions are involved in the same collective process of drawing their conclusions about where they want to pitch their demands, and then the unions will come together and reach an agreed position to put to the government. I understand RCN are aiming somewhere around 12%, Unite somewhere, I think very similar to NIPSA, 15% or 3,000, and Unison around about £2,000 flat across all grades. And obviously those discussions will then take place and we see where that ends up. But we caveat this in NIPSA by saying we don't believe that this pay claim, this modest pay claim, can be achieved without a struggle. A struggle is now inevitable on pay. If we aim appropriately on pay in the health service, then a struggle is inevitable. And we have to learn some of the lessons over preceding years. We certainly need to learn some of the lessons of the disputes in Northern Ireland that brought significant improvements, but not all that we would have wanted to have achieved. First of all, we would say massive amounts of work has to go into preparing the ground, to make the public aware of the claim, to make our own members aware and confident of fighting for the claim, and making sure that we are not outmaneuvered by the enemy press that will unquestionably attack any claim put forward by health service workers. We all know the media is perfectly happy with paying health service workers in claps, but they're very reluctant to support any idea that they should be paid in coins. I think secondly, what we want to do is to make sure that we adjust appropriately to ensure that we can organise safely, taking account of COVID and taking account of the problems that arise in trying to organise, but also making sure COVID doesn't become a reason not to organise, nor does it become a reason to abandon trade union democracy. We have to find ways around and through COVID. I think as well, we want to emphasise the issue of unity of the health service workforce. Not to put too fine a point on it, but they began to open up a division between nurses and other health workers in Northern Ireland that was not at all helpful, and in the end probably had an impact on the overall package that we achieved in the end. So we want to avoid that sense of nurses are a separate entity from all other health workers. If we stand united, we will win more. And then I think we have to say, if we enter into a fight, then we have to be prepared to go the distance. And I know I'm echoing the points that are made by other colleagues. We have to be prepared to go into a real fight, and a real fight means pain for workers. And we shouldn't say it any other way. There is no way to engage in successful industrial action without taking a certain amount of hit and a certain amount of pain. What we have to do is organise, be honest and prepared for it. And then finally, I think the critical point is this: the trade union movement needs to move from a position whereby it is constantly on the defensive onto an offensive. It is a proven fact that we can win significant gains at this point in time. We have, the movement in general has pushed back on A levels. The teaching unions have been successful in massively improving health and safety in schools. Other workers have managed to force employers to make real concessions on COVID. Now we have to force the government to make very real concessions on health service pay as well. And if we go in with a view that we are fighting to win, we believe all of those aims are possible. So this is the beginning really of a discussion around health service pay. The unions have to come together, they have to formulate a common position, and then formulate a common strategy for struggle. And I have every confidence that NSSN will play a very important role in making sure that that strategy is developed and applied on the ground. So look forward to the next stage of the struggle, comrades. Solidarity and forward to socialism. Thank you.
Thanks, Padraig, very much. And I think we've got a big responsibility to make sure we give full support to NHS workers fighting tooth and nail to get the 15% and proper staffing levels as well across the NHS that we all need. So we got two more contributors. If I can ask you to just be as brief as you can be. Max?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, so I'm Social Party member and USDAW union rep. I'd just like to give a brief rundown of the situation. So really, as lockdown has eased, it's clear that workers' rights must be defended and extended. I'm really glad to hear a lot of talk on that vein today. So the herd immunity approach has been very clearly exposed for what it is, which is essentially class genocide. With an NHS cut to the bone by decades of austerity, this swell of COVID has undoubtedly exposed these capitalist attacks on our healthcare. The ripple effect of this is unfortunately deadly. Nationally, employers have been attacking health and safety measures won by their members and their reps. In all essential sectors, PPE has lagged far behind the medical consensus. Any gaps in the union rank and file have been miserably exploited by the bosses. In retail, employers have raised the number of people allowed in stores, raising serious concerns about worker and consumer safety, whereas other sectors ended up opening later. Workers, including myself, have been disciplined for adhering to social distancing guidelines. In my workplace, a Tesco freezer warehouse, targets have been attempted to be reintroduced. All the usual tricks of management. They'll say that it's an informal meeting, but then they'll ask us to sign certain things. So obviously, I've been circulating USDAW activist material as well as NSSN material to my mailing list in order to try and help co-workers resist some of these essentially lies. In USDAW recognised retail, distribution and transport, a couple of weeks ago, Paddy Lillis' tripartite approach, which was in reality a hollow mood for national unity and class collaboration with higher management and appeasement to move terms and conditions from one hand to the other to allow retail giants to make up the shortfall. They've got to claw some of their furlough money back some way, haven't they? This is wrong. It's an insult to the rank and file who have and continue to risk their lives to keep the country running through a global pandemic, while bosses and their backers in the Salmon Fisher Index get millions in bonuses. This for-profit flailing has resulted in 5 coronavirus cases and 1 death in my workplace. The death being of a Romanian agency worker who has had to have his body flown back home for cremation. And still management have not changed the way they train new workers. So really the route to consistent workplace safety is to collectively own it. We can't control what we don't own. So like I said, I just want to reiterate the comments from the fighting workers and reps that have attended this really quite inspiring Shop Steward Network conference. And we need a planned socialist economy under our own control in order to prevent more deaths and more attacks on our class. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. James?
Hi, thanks, Catherine. I just wanted to report very briefly from Gloucester and District Trades Council, of which I'm the president, and I wanted to first of all say that the Trades Council is actively supporting the NHS pay campaign. We had a protest in Gloucester city centre yesterday. We've had a NHS worker speak at the Trades Council, and I'm sure we're going to be doing more in the following days and weeks. The Trades Council's affiliated to the National Shop Stewards Network, which has been key in furthering the work of the Trades Council to become a voice for the working class locally and to bring together the unions and the trade unionists in the area. And we're currently organising a Key Workers Summit, which we intend to be a cross-union event to bring together key workers from all unions locally to formulate a strategy for fighting back and to promote solidarity amongst all key workers and trade unionists. We'll send the details of that once they're confirmed to hopefully be included in an NSSN bulletin. So that's it really. I just wanted to say what we're doing in Gloucester and District Trades Council and thank the NSSN for all the support and inspiration.
Thanks, James, very much. Chip is going to be next. I'm going to mention the PCS Tate dispute. Hi, Chip.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi.
How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I can't speak officially for Tate, but I sit on the culture sector GEC for PCS, and as you're probably all aware, I'm the poetry on a picket line organiser, and I was on the rally and demo yesterday. So at Tate, 313 jobs have gone at Tate Enterprises. So very carefully, of course, Tate have hived off the shop and the catering people into a separate entity, which are not getting the money from the bailout. So they're now on indefinite strike. So watch this space. There's a strike fund, all that sort of stuff. You can find it if you Google PCS Tate. So on indefinite strike, they're not going back until they're reinstated. There's a ballot going on at the South Bank Centre, again another PCS shop, where they're looking to lay off another approximately the same number of people. I think it's up to 400. Same excuse. The chant is coronavirus, no excuse to fire us, which is great. The first time you hear it, a bit like my poetry, but it hits the spot, which I hope this will do, and sends you off with a song in your hearts. So I wrote this one on December the 13th, and it's called Majority Decision Blue. We're on the ropes, all right, that's plain to see. We've taken a shellacking, now we'll take a knee. Have a breather, nod to our seconds, and get up at 8. This is our fate. Back to the road work, into the gym when we have time. We have good reason and sufficient rhyme. Maybe we had a little bad advice from our own corner. Maybe not. That's not the point. When all's been said, that corner's red. Some may have had their noses put quite out of joint, but they'll get through it. We know the work that we're about, so let's get to it. Solidarity, comrades.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chip, for that. And then our final speaker, just to sum up this great rally, is Rob Williams again.
Well, thanks, Catherine. Before we go any further, I just want to put a call out to Linda Taff, our National Secretary, who's been dealing with some personal issues in the last, the last few months, really. And I want to put a big mention out to Linda, and also the NSSN officers and steering committee. I'd like to thank Catherine for chairing today. But obviously today I think has been a fantastic rally. We haven't been at the seaside, but nevertheless, I think it's been a really good event. And of course, it's sending a signal. It's sending a signal to the TUC Congress this week that this has to be a council of war. And the questions that were asked, I think, the points that were raised in the meeting, which are very, very important for us to deal with. The workers don't pay the price for this crisis. We fight all attacks on pay and terms and conditions and pensions. We fight for every job. Every workplace that threatens redundancy, then we fight for that workplace to stay open, to defend jobs and defend the communities. Those workplaces, like British Airways, like Debenhams, should be taken into public ownership. We support the strikes that are taking place, the occupations. We want to raise the idea of militant action like occupations that we believe will be necessary to retain those jobs. I thank Chip for mentioning the Tate strike. I too was on that march along with Chip yesterday, and did manage to reach the end of the NHS demo as well. For those comrades in London, please go down to Tate Britain and Tate Modern, go on the picket lines. It's an indefinite strike by those workers. And when comrades raise how we can build the trade unions, that strike tells you everything, how we can build the trade union. There are 6.5 million workers in the trade unions in Britain, but unfortunately there are many, many million more who aren't in the trade unions. And the way you attract them is by having a fighting programme, taking a lead. At the moment, I think workers are looking for a lead, and we have seen a bit of that. As Sean Macaulay said, the NEU had an online meeting of up to 20,000 of their members. They recruited about 20,000 of their members into that union during the pandemic, because unions are relevant, unions are attractive when you're fighting for your lives and livelihoods, as you are in this period as well. I want to shout out as well to those victimised workers the comrades have mentioned during this strike. We had a message from Sharon Graham, Executive Officer of Unite. I'm sure would have liked to be here. She is meeting today reps from Go Ahead in Manchester to secure the reinstatement, we hope, of Colin Eden, that the action is being taken for with those workers. We support, of course, the struggle for Tony Smith, for Richie Venton, and the many other victimised workers. I want to give a special message to a comrade who has been very active during the pandemic, Mo, the bus driver in London, who is now back as a rep for Unite in his garage. in South London, who really led the public campaign after up to 30 bus drivers in London lost their lives during the COVID pandemic. And of course, it's been mentioned by many comrades about the role of Labour councils. Let's make it absolutely clear. The NSSN has been clear over this last decade and back all of its history. And that is that we call on Labour councils not to implement Tory cuts. We said that back in 2010 when George Osborne and David Cameron unrolled their cuts offensive. We say that now. You should be lining up with your own workforce and your own communities, not passing on Tory cuts. But we also say, not just there, but also for agencies like the Transport for London, where of course we have a Labour mayor, Sadiq Khan. We say to Sadiq Khan, you should be on the side of the unions, not the Tory. You should be fighting against the Tory government from implementing. You should be lining up with the transport unions in London and refuse to pass on Tory cuts. Comrades, this is the most serious time facing our class probably since the Second World War. But we've already seen this summer that actually, despite all the restrictions, despite the issues raised, the workers and young people particularly are up for the fight. The role of the trade unions is to put themselves at the head of that movement. I think it's been a fantastic rally again. We are lobbying the TUC. We might be doing it online. We're fighting for a programme. I return to that issue. We call on the TUC this week. You know, we should be having a day of protest in the next week or month against the attempt by the government to stop the furlough scheme. But our message is clear: work or full pay. We don't pay the price for this crisis. Thanks for your support with this rally. If you're not already affiliated to the NSSN, your union branch or trades council, get involved, be part of the fight to make sure that we don't pay the price for this crisis. Solidarity.
Thanks, comrades. And I think another excellent rally, lobbying the TUC. As usual, I think this is the best part of the TUC in terms of bringing together some of the best speakers across our movement and making the message clear. We don't want to go back to how things were before the pandemic. We have a whole future to fight for, and it's a much better future where our movement really flexes its muscles and makes sure that we get rights for workers, job security, jobs for all, but decent remuneration as well. So plenty to get stuck into. Keep in touch about the disputes that happen in your local areas and keep putting that pressure on that our movement should be representing and fighting back alongside us. Thanks for that. Hold.